The bell above the door of Rosie's diner chimed for the 100th time that morning, and Beth Callahan didn't even look up from the coffee pot she was refilling. Her feet ached in shoes that had seen better days 3 years ago, and the apron tied around her waist bore stains from a breakfast rush that had started at 5:30 and showed no signs of slowing down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Coffee, hon? She asked the trucker sliding into booth 7, her voice carrying that particular blend of warmth and exhaustion that comes from working double shifts at a roadside diner off Interstate 40 in Amarillo, Texas. The trucker, weathered face, calloused hands, eyes that had seen too many miles, nodded gratefully. Beth poured, noticing the way his hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around the mug. She'd been doing this job for 8 years now, ever since her husband Danny had died in a construction accident, leaving her with 2 kids to raise and a mortgage that didn't care about grief. She'd learned to read people in those 8 years. "This man hadn't eaten in a while. What'll it be?" she asked, pulling her order pad from her apron pocket. "Just the coffee's fine, ma'am," he said, not meeting her eyes. Beth had heard that line before. She glanced toward the kitchen, where Raymond, the cook, was flipping pancakes with the practiced ease of a man who'd been doing it since the Carter administration. The owner, Mr. Hutchins, was in his office upstairs, which meant he wouldn't see what she was about to do. "Tell you what," Beth said, her pen already moving across the order pad. "The kitchen made an extra breakfast platter by mistake this morning. Shame to waste it. You'd be doing us a favor." The trucker's eyes met hers then, and she saw the pride fighting with hunger. She'd seen that look in her own mirror, back in those early days after Danny died. "No charge," she added quietly. "Really? It's going in the trash otherwise." She didn't wait for him to argue. She turned and clipped the order to the wheel in the kitchen window, catching Raymond's eye. He looked at the ticket, then at her, then at the trucker. Raymond had been working with Beth long enough to understand. He nodded once and got to work. This wasn't the first time Beth had done this. It wouldn't be the last. The thing about kindness, Beth had learned, was that it cost less than people thought. An extra scoop of hash browns here, an accidentally oversized portion there, a mistake order that just happened to need eating. These small acts added up to something larger than their individual parts. She paid for some of it out of her own tips. Some of it she disguised in the kitchen waste reports. Raymond helped her cover by being creative with the inventory. Mr. Hutchins, if he noticed, never said anything. Maybe he had a kind streak too, buried under his gruff exterior and his complaints about overhead costs. Or maybe he just figured that a diner that fed hungry people, even the ones who couldn't always pay, was a diner that built loyalty. Either way, Beth kept doing what she felt was right. The trucker ate his breakfast, eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, and a short stack of pancakes, like a man who'd forgotten what food tasted like. When he finished, he tried again to pay for more than just the coffee, but Beth waved him off. "You drive safe now," she said, refilling his coffee one last time. "Roads get dangerous when you're tired and hungry." He left her a $5 tip on a $3 coffee, which was more than he could probably afford. And Beth felt that familiar tightness in her chest that came from knowing she'd done something good and something sad all at once. The morning wore on. Beth served coffee and eggs and listened to the endless stream of stories that flowed through Rosie's diner like water through a creek bed. She heard about divorces and new grandchildren, about jobs lost and jobs found, about dreams deferred and hopes rekindled. She poured coffee and cleared plates and tied her kindness into the fabric of routine until it became as natural as breathing. Around 2 in the afternoon, during that lull between lunch and dinner, when the diner was mostly empty, Beth was wiping down tables when she heard the sound. It was distant at first, like thunder on a clear day, a low rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She paused, the damp cloth in her hand, and listened. The rumbling grew louder, resolving itself into the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines. Multiple motorcycle engines, lots of them, Raymond stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, and moved to the window. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Beth joined him, and her breath caught in her throat. Coming down the highway was a procession of motorcycles, gleaming chrome and black leather, a river of steel and rebellion flowing toward them with deliberate purpose. She counted 10, then 20, then lost count as they kept coming. The lead rider was a massive man, his arms covered in tattoos, a thick beard obscuring half his face. Behind him rode others, men and women, all wearing the same patch on their backs, Hell's Angels. Beth had seen them before, of course. Murillo sat on a major cross-country route, and motorcycle clubs passed through regularly. But never this many at once, and never headed straight for Rosie's diner, with what looked like focused intention. The motorcycles began pulling into the parking lot, filling every available space, and then some. The riders dismounted with practiced ease, stretching road-weary muscles and removing helmets. Beth counted 60, then 70. 70 Hell's Angels, all wearing their colors, all looking like they'd ridden through hell itself to get here. "Beth," Raymond said quietly, his voice tight, "maybe you should go get Mr. Hutchins." But Beth was already moving toward the door, smoothing her apron, checking her reflection in the glass to make sure her hair was still pinned back properly. Because whatever else these people were, whatever reputation preceded them, right now they were customers. And Beth Callahan had never turned away a customer who came through her door looking for a meal. The bell chimed as she pushed the door open and stepped out onto the worn concrete of the parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down, and the smell of hot asphalt mixed with motorcycle exhaust and leather. The lead rider, the big man with the tattooed arms, was walking toward her, and Beth had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he was even more intimidating. 6'4" at least, with shoulders like a linebacker and hands that looked like they could crush walnuts. His leather vest bore patches that spoke of years on the road, and his eyes, surprisingly blue under heavy brows, held an intensity that made Beth's heart beat faster, but she'd raised two. Teenagers on her own and dealt with drunk truckers, and handled Mr. Hutchins when he was in a mood. She wasn't about to be intimidated now. "Welcome to Rosie's," she said, her voice steady and warm, the same voice she used for every customer. "I'm Beth. We weren't expecting quite this many folks, but we'll do our best to get everyone fed." The big man stopped a few feet away, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Behind him, the other riders had gone quiet, watching the interaction with interest. "Name's Jack," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that matched his motorcycle. "Jack Morrison. This is the West Texas chapter." He gestured to the crowd behind him. "We've been riding since dawn and we're hungry. But we heard something about this place. Heard about a waitress who takes care of people." Beth felt her cheeks warm. "I just serve food, same as any diner." "No," Jack said, and there was something in his voice, respect maybe, or recognition. "We heard something different. We heard you feed people who need feeding, whether they can pay or not. Heard you've got a heart as big as Texas and hands that never stop working." "That true?" Beth didn't know what to say to that. She glanced back at the diner, where Raymond's face was pressed against the window, his expression somewhere between terrified and fascinated. "I do my job," she said simply. "Everyone deserves a hot meal." Jack Morrison smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his intimidating face into something almost gentle. "That's what we heard," he said. He turned to the crowd behind him and raised his voice. "All right, you animals. We're eating here, and we're paying full price, and we're tipping like kings. And the first person who causes Beth here any trouble answers to me personally. We clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," and "You got it, Prez," echoed across the parking lot. Jack turned back to Beth. "We'll need a lot of food," he said. "Think you can handle feeding 70 hungry bikers?" Beth looked at the crowd, did some quick mental math, and thought about the stock in the kitchen and Raymond's abilities and the sheer logistics of what was being asked. Then she smiled, the same smile she gave her kids when they thought something was impossible. Sugar, she said. I raised 2 teenagers and worked double shifts for 8 years. I can handle anything. You'll come on in and let's get you fed. And with that, Beth Callahan turned and walked back into Rosie's diner, followed by 70 Hell's Angels, who were about to discover that sometimes the toughest people come in the most unexpected packages. The inside of Rosie's diner had never felt smaller. 70 leather-clad bikers filled every booth, every stool at the counter, every available inch of space, until the walls seemed to breathe with the collective presence of the West Texas chapter of the Hells Angels. The air grew thick with the scent of road dust, engine oil, and raw humanity. Beth stood behind the counter, her order pad in hand, surveying the controlled chaos with the calm efficiency of a general planning a military campaign. Raymond had emerged from the kitchen, his face pale but determined, a spatula gripped in his hand like a weapon. "We're going to need reinforcements," he said quietly. Beth was already reaching for the phone mounted on the wall behind the counter. She dialed a number she knew by heart and waited through 2 rings before her daughter's voice came through. "Mom, I'm studying for my— Jessica, I need you at the diner now. Bring your brother." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was a pause. Jessica Callahan, 19 years old, and in her 2nd year at Amarillo Community College, knew her mother's voice well enough to hear the urgency beneath the calm. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I've got 70 hungry customers and 2 hours of daylight left. I'm calling in the family." Another pause, then. "We'll be there in 15 minutes. Beth hung up and turned to face her clientele. Jack Morrison had claimed the corner booth, the one with the best view of both the entrance and the kitchen, she noticed, and sat with 3 other riders who carried themselves with the same authority he did. The rest of the Angels had distributed themselves throughout the diner with surprising organization, leaving the counter stools for the smaller frame members and arranging themselves so that no one had their back to a door or window. These were people who lived by different rules, Beth realized. People for whom awareness meant survival. She took a deep breath, grabbed a stack of menus from beneath the counter, and began distributing them with the same cheerful efficiency she brought to every shift. "All right, folks," she announced, her voice carrying over the rumble of conversation. "I'm going to be straight with you. We're a small operation, and we weren't expecting this kind of crowd. But here's what we can do. We've got a full breakfast menu available all day, lunch specials that'll stick to your ribs, and the best chicken fried steak in the Texas Panhandle. Coffee's fresh, and it's bottomless. I'm going to take orders starting from this side and working my way around. Fair warning, it's going to take some time to get everyone fed, so I appreciate your patience." A woman with silver-streaked hair and a scar running down her left cheek called out from booth 3, "Honey, we've been riding since Flagstaff. We can wait a little longer for good food." "Appreciate that," Beth said with a genuine smile. She moved to the first booth and pulled out her pad. "Now what can I get you gentlemen started with?" The ordering process took 20 minutes. Beth moved from table to table, booth to booth, writing down requests with practiced shorthand, while keeping up a steady stream of friendly conversation. She learned names, Diesel, Hammer, Luna, Prophet, and made mental notes about dietary restrictions, allergies, and preferences. One rider was diabetic and needed to watch his sugar. Another was lactose intolerant. Several were vegetarian, which surprised her until she remembered that people were people, no matter what they wore or rode. By the time she finished taking orders, Jessica and Marcus had arrived. Jessica, tall like her father had been, with Beth's auburn hair and determined chin, tied an apron around her waist without being asked and began filling water glasses. Marcus, 17 and still growing into his lanky frame, headed straight for the kitchen to help Raymond. "Mom," Jessica whispered, as they passed each other near the coffee station, "do you know who these people are?" "They're customers who are paying for their meals," Beth said firmly. "That's all we need to know." Jessica glanced at the crowd, at the leather and tattoos and fierce faces, then back at her mother. Something in Beth's expression must have convinced her, because she nodded and grabbed the coffee pot without another word. In the kitchen, Raymond had transformed into a culinary machine. The griddle sizzled with dozens of eggs, bacon strips covered every available inch of space, and hash browns browned in multiple pans simultaneously. Marcus worked the fryer, dropping basket after basket of hand-cut French fries while keeping an eye on the toast that popped up in rapid succession. 13 orders of chicken-fried steak, Beth called out, clipping tickets to the order wheel. 8 breakfast platters with eggs over easy. 6 with scrambled. 10 burgers, 4 medium rare, 6 medium. 5 chef salads. 4 grilled cheese sandwiches. And a partridge in a pear tree. Raymond didn't crack a smile, but his eyes flickered with amusement. How many of these people are you planning to feed for free? All of them are paying, Raymond. Jack made that clear. Uh-huh. And I suppose that trucker this morning was paying too? Beth didn't answer. She grabbed plates as they came up, arranged them with practiced precision, and began delivering food. Jessica worked the other side of the diner, her initial nervousness giving way to the same efficient grace her mother possessed. They moved in synchronized rhythm, 2 generations of Callahan women who knew how to work. Jack Morrison watched Beth as she delivered a plate of eggs and hash browns to the booth across from his. She moved with economy of motion, never wasting a step, her hands steady despite the chaos. When she finally made it to his table, she set down his chicken-fried steak with the same care she'd given everyone else. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Beth paused, pot of coffee in hand. "Depends on the question. Why'd you come out to meet us? Most people see 70 angels pull up. They lock the doors and call the cops." Beth considered this while refilling his coffee cup. The diner hummed with conversation around them. Laughter, the clink of silverware on plates, the comfortable sounds of people eating together. "My husband died 8 years ago," she said finally. "Construction accident. Left me with 2 kids and a mountain of debt. In those first months I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on. You know who helped me? Strangers. People who had no reason to care but did anyway. A mechanic who fixed my car for parts only. A landlord who let me pay rent late for 6 months straight. The folks at the food bank who never made me feel small for needing help." She met Jack's eyes directly. "I learned something from that. People aren't what they look like on the outside. They're what they do when nobody's watching. And I figured 70 people who rode all this way together, who look out for each other like a family. Those are people worth feeding." Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his coffee cup in a small salute. "You're a wise woman, Beth Callahan." "I'm a tired woman who's served a lot of coffee," she corrected. "But I appreciate the sentiment." She moved on to the next table, unaware that Jack Morrison was pulling out his phone and typing a message that would change everything. The afternoon stretched into early evening. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that filtered through the diner's windows. Beth's feet screamed with pain, her lower back ached, and her hands had developed a persistent tremor from carrying heavy plates. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept making sure every person in her diner felt welcomed and fed. Around 6 o'clock, as the last of the meals were being delivered, Jack Morrison stood up from his booth. The diner fell silent, not from fear but from respect. When the president of the chapter stood, people paid attention. "I want to say something," Jack announced, his voice carrying easily through the space. He looked at Beth, who had frozen mid-stride with a tray of empty plates in her hands. "We came here because we heard about you. Word travels in our community, maybe faster than you'd think. Stories about a waitress in Amarillo who feeds people who need feeding, who doesn't ask questions or make judgments, who treats everyone with the same kindness, whether they can pay or not." Beth felt her face grow hot. Jessica and Marcus had stopped working to listen, both of them looking at their mother with expressions of surprise and pride. "We wanted to see if the stories were true," Jack continued. "And now we know they are. You fed 70 hungry riders without blinking. You treated us like human beings. And you did it all while running your kids ragged and probably putting off your own meal. There were murmurs of agreement from the assembled angels. So here's what's going to happen, Jack said. First, we're paying our bills, full price, like I promised. Second, we're leaving tips that'll make your eyes water. And third, he paused, his expression serious. Third, we're going to make you an offer. But first, let's settle up. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of payment processing. Beth's cash register had never seen so much money at once. True to Jack's word, every angel paid in full. And the tips were extraordinary, 20s and 50s left on tables where $10 meals had been served. By the time the last payment was processed, Beth's hands were shaking. The register showed more money than she typically made in a month. Jessica was crying quietly, trying to hide it while she wiped down tables. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes wide. Even Raymond, who prided himself on never showing emotion, looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Jack Morrison approached the counter where Beth stood, still trying to process what had just happened. Behind him, the other angels were gathering their belongings, preparing to head back out to their bikes. But they weren't leaving yet. They were waiting for something now, Jack said, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the counter. About that offer. Beth picked up the card. It was simple black leather with silver embossed text. Jack Morrison, President, Hell's Angels, West Texas Chapter. A phone number. Nothing else. What kind of offer? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's smile was warm, transforming his intimidating face once again. Beth Callahan, how would you like to become the official caterer for the West Texas chapter of the Hell's Angels? Beth stared at the business card in her hand, then back at Jack Morrison's weathered face. The word caterer hung in the air between them like something foreign, something that didn't quite belong in the vocabulary of a woman who'd spent 8 years slinging hash browns and refilling coffee cups at a truck stop diner. I don't understand, she said slowly. You want me to... What exactly? Jack gestured toward an empty booth. Mind if we sit? This might take a few minutes to explain. Beth glanced at Jessica, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes while pretending to wipe down the same table for the third time. Raymond had emerged from the kitchen. His arms crossed over his chest in that protective stance he adopted whenever he thought Beth might be getting into something over her head. It's all right, Beth told them both, then followed Jack to the booth. As she slid into the cracked vinyl seat, she noticed that the other angels hadn't dispersed. They stood in small clusters throughout the diner, talking quietly among themselves, but clearly waiting to see how this conversation would unfold. Jack settled his considerable bulk across from her, his tattooed forearms resting on the table. Up close, Beth could make out the details of the ink, eagles and skulls, names and dates, symbols whose meanings she could only guess at. Each mark told a story, she realized. Each one represented something that mattered. Let me tell you about our chapter, Jack began. We're not just a bunch of guys who like to ride motorcycles. We're a family, a brotherhood and sisterhood of people who've chosen this life, who look out for each other when the rest of the world doesn't give a damn. You understand that kind of bond? Beth thought about Raymond, who'd covered her shifts when Marcus had the flu. About Mr. Hutchins, who'd never once complained when she'd been late because Jessica needed a ride to class. About the network of support she'd built over the years, the people who'd become her chosen family after Danny died. I understand, she said. We have events, Jack continued. Rallies, runs, memorial services for brothers and sisters who've passed. Charity rides for causes we believe in. Every few months we gather, sometimes just our chapter, sometimes with other chapters from across the state. And we need to feed people, lots of people. Quality food, not just burgers from some chain restaurant. He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes intense. What we need is someone we can trust, someone who understands that family isn't always blood, someone who'll feed us like we matter because we do. And after watching you work today, after seeing how you treated every single person in this diner with dignity and respect, we think you're that person. Beth's mind raced. Catering meant contracts, logistics, equipment she didn't own. It meant coordinating with venues she'd never seen, preparing food in quantities she'd never attempted. It was a leap into unknown territory, and she'd built her life on solid ground, on things she could count on. "Jack, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just a waitress. I don't have a catering business. I don't have the equipment or the licenses or—" "We'll help with all of that," Jack interrupted gently. "We're not asking you to do this alone. We've got members who own restaurants, who have commercial kitchens, who know the business side of food service. We're offering you a partnership, Beth. You bring the heart and the skill. We bring the resources and the support. Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why go to all this trouble?" "There are professional caterers all over Texas." Jack's expression softened. "Because professional caterers treat us like a liability. They jack up their prices, water down their food, and treat us like we're going to trash their equipment and skip out on the bill. They see the patches on our backs and assume we're criminals. You saw 70 strangers walk into your diner wearing colors that scare most people. And you smiled and grabbed your order pad." He pulled out his phone and opened up a photo album. Turning the screen toward Beth, the images showed gatherings of hundreds of people, bikers and their families. Children playing, elders sitting in lawn chairs, tables loaded with food. Community captured in pixels. "This is what we're about," Jack said. "This is what most people don't see. And we want someone feeding us who sees it, who gets it." Beth studied the photos, her server's eye automatically cataloging the food visible in the frames. Barbecue, casseroles, sheet cakes, enormous pots of chili. Food that spoke of love and effort, of people who cared about what they were serving. She could do this. The thought surprised her with its certainty. She could cook for these gatherings, could scale up her portions and organize the logistics. It would be hard work, harder than anything she'd done before. But wasn't that what she'd been doing anyway? Working hard, pushing through, making something out of nothing. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" she asked, and felt Jack's energy shift from persuasion to negotiation. "The first event is in 6 weeks, he said. "Annual memorial run for fallen brothers. About 200 people. It's here in Amarillo at Crowley Park. We'd need lunch, something substantial that can be served outdoors. After that, we've got events scheduled roughly every month. 200 people. Beth did the math in her head. Food costs, prep time, serving logistics. It was manageable. Challenging, but manageable. "I'd need help," she said. "My kid's Raymond, if he's willing. Maybe hire a few extra hands." "Already assumed," Jack confirmed. "We'll pay fair rates for everyone involved. This isn't charity, Beth. This is business. You're providing a service, and we're paying what it's worth." The bell above the door chimed, and Beth glanced up to see Mr. Hutchins entering the diner. He stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the scene. The leather-clad bikers filling his establishment, the money overflowing from the register, his waitress deep in conversation with a man who looked like he could bench press a Volkswagen. "Beth?" Mr. Hutchins's voice carried that particular note of concern mixed with confusion. "Is everything all right here?" Beth stood smoothing her apron out of habit. "Mr. Hutchins, I'd like you to meet Jack Morrison. We were just discussing a business opportunity." She spent the next 10 minutes explaining the offer, while Mr. Hutchins listened with the calculating expression of a man who'd run a business for 30 years. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Beth to Jack to the assembled angels who still waited patiently throughout the diner. "You'd still work your regular shifts?" Mr. Hutchins asked finally. "Absolutely," Beth said. "The catering would be on my days off, or we'd work around the schedule." Mr. Hutchins nodded slowly. "And you think you can handle this? No offense, Beth, but you've never done anything like this before." It was a fair question, and Beth appreciated that he was asking it directly, rather than simply shutting down the idea. She thought about the trucker she'd fed that morning, about the countless times she'd stretched her tips to make sure someone got a meal, about raising 2 kids on a waitress's salary and somehow making it work when the math said it was impossible. "I can handle it," she said with quiet confidence. Mr. Hutchins looked at Jack. "You're serious about this? About supporting her with equipment and resources?" "Dead serious," Jack replied. "We take care of our own, and we're making Beth part of our extended family. She won't be in this alone. Something in Mr. Hutchins' expression shifted. He extended his hand to Jack, who shook it firmly. "Then you've got my blessing," he said. "Hell, maybe some of that biker money will keep this old place running another few years." Jack laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the diner. "We'll still be coming here for breakfast, don't you worry." Beth felt something unfurling in her chest, hope, maybe, or possibility. The kind of feeling she hadn't experienced since before Danny died, when the future had seemed full of potential instead of just challenges to overcome. "Okay," she said, the word coming out stronger than she'd expected. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll be your caterer." The response was immediate. The angels throughout the diner erupted in cheers and applause, the sound washing over Beth like a wave. Jessica rushed over and threw her arms around her mother, tears streaming down her face. Marcus emerged from the kitchen with Raymond, both of them grinning. Even Mr. Hutchins was smiling, shaking his head in that way that meant he thought Beth was crazy, but admired her for it anyway. Jack stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Beth Callahan." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip, and wondered what exactly she'd just agreed to. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, her kids, her co-workers, these strange new allies in leather and denim, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like maybe, just maybe, the hard times were finally starting to ease. Jack pulled out a folder from his saddlebag. Apparently he'd come prepared for this possibility, and spread several documents across the table. "Let's talk specifics," he said. "Menu options, pricing, logistics. We want to do this right." And so, as the sun set over Amarillo and the evening shift at Rosie's Diner transitioned into something entirely new, Beth Callahan began planning her first catering event. Around her, the West Texas chapter of the Hells Angels settled back into their seats, ordered more coffee, and began sharing their own stories and preferences. The diner had become something more than just a place to eat. It had become the birthplace of an unlikely partnership, the starting point of a journey that would take Beth places she'd never imagined. But first, she had 200 people to feed in 6 weeks. She grabbed her order pad and got to work. The next morning, Beth woke to her alarm at 4:30 with muscles she didn't know she had screaming in protest. Yesterday's marathon shift serving 70 bikers had left its mark. Her feet were swollen, her back was stiff, and her hands ached from carrying countless plates. But as she lay in the pre-dawn darkness of her bedroom, staring at the ceiling, she felt something else too. Excitement. The business card Jack had given her sat on her nightstand, a tangible reminder that yesterday hadn't been a dream. She picked it up, running her thumb over the embossed lettering, then reached for her phone. 3 text messages waited for her, all from Jack, all sent late last night. The first contained a detailed breakdown of the Memorial Run event. Expected attendance, venue details, equipment already available on site. The second was a contact list of chapter members who could help with various aspects of the catering operation. The third was simpler: get some rest. "We'll talk details tomorrow." "You're going to do great." Beth sat up slowly, wincing at the protest from her lower back, and padded into the kitchen. The house was silent. Jessica wouldn't wake for another 2 hours, and Marcus could sleep through an earthquake. She made coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine that had been a wedding gift 17 years ago, one of the few things that had survived the lean years after Danny's death. Well, the coffee brewed. She pulled out the folder Jack had left with her. Inside were contracts, liability waivers, payment schedules, and menu suggestions compiled from various chapter members. Someone had even included recipes that had been crowd favorites at past events. The organization was impressive. The attention to detail, something she hadn't expected from a motorcycle club. But then, that was the point, wasn't it? Everything about yesterday had challenged her assumptions. These weren't the violent outlaws the news loved to portray. They were people. Complicated, loyal, organized people who took care of their own. Beth's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed an unknown number with a local area code. She answered cautiously. "Beth, this is Maggie Chen. Jack gave me your number." The voice was female, confident, with a slight Texas drawl. I run Chen's Kitchen Supply over on Buchanan Street. Jack says you need equipment for the memorial run. Beth glanced at the clock. Not even 5 in the morning. You're calling pretty early, Maggie laughed. My old man rides with the West Texas chapter. When Jack Morrison says jump, we ask how high while we're already in the air. Can you meet me at the shop around 9? I want to go through what you'll need. 3 hours later, Beth found herself standing in a warehouse-sized store filled with commercial kitchen equipment. Maggie Chen turned out to be a compact woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and hands that moved constantly as she talked, pointing out various items and explaining their uses for 200 people. You'll need these warming trays, Maggie said, running her hand along a row of stainless steel equipment, and at least 3 of these chafing dishes. You planning to cook on site or transport pre-cooked food? I haven't gotten that far yet, Beth admitted. Maggie nodded without judgment. Okay, let's think through this. The park has electrical hookups, but you're going to want backup propane burners just in case. Weather in 6 weeks could be anything. Hot, cold, rainy. You need to plan for variables. They spent 2 hours going through equipment lists, with Maggie jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. By the end, Beth's head was spinning with information about food safety temperatures, serving utensils, portable sinks, and health department regulations. This is a lot, Beth said, staring at the growing list. It is, Maggie agreed. But you're not doing it alone. Half this equipment the chapter already owns from past events. The rest I'm renting to you at cost, and I'll be there on the day to help set up. So will about 15 other people Jack's already lined up. Why? Beth asked the question that had been nagging at her since yesterday. Why is everyone so willing to help? Maggie's expression softened. You fed people who needed feeding. In our world, that means something. Loyalty runs deep, Beth. You showed us yours yesterday without even realizing it. Now we're showing you ours. By the time Beth left Chen's Kitchen Supply, she had a detailed equipment list, a timeline for pickup and setup, and Maggie's personal cell phone number with instructions to call any time, day or night if she had questions. Her next stop was the venue itself. Crowley Park sat on the eastern edge of Amarillo, a sprawling green space with pavilions, picnic areas, and enough parking for the massive gathering the Angels were planning. Beth walked the grounds with a notebook, sketching rough layouts and thinking through logistics. Where would the serving tables go? How would traffic flow? Where could she set up prep stations? The questions multiplied, but so did the solutions. She could see it taking shape in her mind. The organized chaos of feeding a crowd, the satisfaction of watching people enjoy food she'd prepared. Her phone rang again. This time it was Jessica. Mom, where are you? You're supposed to be at work. Beth glanced at her watch and cursed softly. She was supposed to have started her shift at Rosie's 20 minutes ago. I'm on my way. Cover for me? Already am. Mr. Hutchins wants to talk to you when you get here. The drive back to the diner took 15 minutes through mid-morning traffic. When Beth rushed through the door, apologizing before she'd even removed her jacket, Mr. Hutchins was waiting at the counter with his arms crossed. My office, he said. Now, Beth's stomach sank. She followed him up the narrow stairs to the cramped space he called an office, really just a converted storage room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. He closed the door and gestured for her to sit. I've been thinking about this catering thing, Mr. Hutchins began, and Beth braced herself for the lecture about divided attention and professional responsibilities. And I think we should make some changes around here. Beth blinked. Changes? You've been working doubles for 8 years, Beth. Never complained, never called in sick, never caused me a minute of trouble. You're the backbone of this place and everyone knows it. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously. So here's what I'm proposing. I hire another full-time server to pick up some of your shifts. You cut back to 30 hours a week, still full-time benefits, same hourly rate. That gives you time to build this catering business properly. Beth felt her throat tighten. Mr. Hutchins, I can't afford to lose those hours. Let me finish, he interrupted gently. I'm also making you assistant manager. 10% raise, effective immediately. You'll handle scheduling, inventory, training new hires, stuff you're basically already doing anyway. Just now I'm paying you for it. Net result is you make about the same money, work fewer hours, and have time to pursue this opportunity. For a moment, Beth couldn't speak. She thought about all the times she'd considered Mr. Hutchins nothing more than a grumpy old man who complained about costs and margins. She'd never seen this coming. Why? She finally managed. Mr. Hutchins smiled, a rare sight that transformed his weathered face. Because yesterday I watched you handle something that would have sent most people running. You saw an opportunity and grabbed it. That takes guts. And because, he paused, his expression growing more serious, because you remind me of my daughter. She died 10 years ago. Car accident. She had your work ethic, your kindness. Watching you yesterday, seeing how your kids look at you, how those bikers respected you. It made me think she'd have been proud to know you. Beth felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Mr. Hutchins, I don't know what to say. Say yes and get back to work. We've got a lunch rush coming. She stood and moved toward the door, then turned back. Thank you. For everything. He waved her off gruffly, already turning to his paperwork, but she saw the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Between serving customers and training Jessica on some of the assistant manager duties she'd be taking over, Beth fielded calls and texts from various angels. A woman named Carla, who did event planning, sent her a detailed checklist. A man called Rusty offered his refrigerated truck for transporting food. Someone named Phoenix, Beth wasn't sure if that was a real name or a road name, sent her photos of previous memorial runs to give her a sense of the atmosphere. By the time her shift ended at 6, Beth had accumulated 17 new contacts in her phone, 3 pages of notes, and a growing sense that she'd stumbled into something much larger than she'd initially understood. This wasn't just a catering gig. This was adoption into a community that operated by rules she was only beginning to comprehend. That evening, Beth spread everything out on her kitchen table. The contracts, the equipment lists, the venue sketches, the recipes, the contact information. Jessica sat across from her, laptop open, already creating spreadsheets for food costs and serving schedules. Marcus, who declared himself head of logistics despite being 17 and having no experience, was drawing up transportation plans for getting everything to the park. Mom, Jessica said, looking up from her computer, do you realize this is crazy? 6 weeks to pull together a catering operation from scratch? Beth looked at her daughter, then at her son, then at the organized chaos spread across the table. She thought about yesterday, about 70 bikers who'd come to her diner because they'd heard about kindness. About Jack Morrison's steady confidence and Maggie Chen's immediate willingness to help. About Mr. Hutchins's unexpected generosity and Raymond's quiet support. Yeah, Beth said, a smile spreading across her face. It's completely crazy, but we're going to do it anyway. Marcus whooped and high-fived his sister. Jessica shook her head but was grinning. And Beth Callahan, 43-year-old waitress and newly appointed assistant manager and aspiring caterer, picked up her pen and got back to planning. The memorial run was 6 weeks away, and she had 200 people to feed. The impossible had never stopped her before. 6 weeks vanished like smoke. Beth had expected the time to crawl, giving her space to breathe and plan. Instead, the days blurred together in a frantic whirlwind of preparation. Practice runs and sleepless nights spent double-checking lists that seemed to multiply every time she looked at them. The morning of the memorial run arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures that promised to climb into the mid-70s by noon, perfect weather for an outdoor event. Beth stood in the parking lot of Crowley Park at 5 in the morning, watching the first trucks arrive with equipment, and felt her stomach twist into knots. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, Raymond said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He'd taken the day off from the diner specifically to help, refusing to accept Beth's protests that he didn't have to. What if I've forgotten something critical? Beth asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. What if the food isn't ready on time? What if you stop borrowing trouble and start focusing on what you know how to do? Raymond interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. You've been cooking for people your whole adult life. This is just more people. 200 more people, Beth muttered. Details. Raymond sipped his coffee and surveyed the park. Look around. You're not alone in this. He was right. As the sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the park began filling with people. Maggie Chen arrived with a truck full of equipment, directing the unloading with the precision of a military commander. Carla, the event planner, appeared with her clipboard and started marking zones with colored tape. Rusty backed his refrigerated truck up to the main pavilion, where the serving area would be set up, and the angels came. Not just the West Texas chapter, but members from neighboring chapters, Dallas, Fort Worth, Lubbock, even a few from Oklahoma and New Mexico. They came on motorcycles that thundered into the parking lot like rolling thunder, filling the air with the rumble of engines and the scent of leather and chrome. But they didn't come just to attend. They came to help. Within 30 minutes, Beth found herself at the center of organized chaos. Angels in leather vests worked alongside her kids, setting up tables and unloading supplies. A woman with purple-streaked hair named Valerie took charge of the beverage station, organizing coolers with military efficiency. A man called Tank, easily 6'6" and built like his namesake, handled the heavy lifting, moving equipment that would have required 3 normal people. Jack Morrison found Beth as she was unpacking boxes of serving utensils, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind raced through the timeline for the day. "How you holding up?" he asked. "Ask me in 8 hours," Beth replied, not looking up from her task. Jack chuckled. "Fair enough. Listen, I want to introduce you to someone." He gestured to an older man standing nearby, perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail and a face mapped with wrinkles that spoke of decades spent outdoors. "This is William Garrett. He's founding member of our chapter, been riding since before most of us were born." Beth wiped her hand on her apron and extended it. William's handshake was firm despite his age. His eyes sharp and assessing. "Jack tells me you're the one responsible for today's feast," William said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I'm certainly going to try," Beth said. "You'll do more than try," William said with quiet certainty. "I've been coming to these memorial runs for 40 years. I've seen a lot of caterers come and go. You know what makes the difference between the ones who succeed and the ones who don't?" Beth shook her head. "Heart," William said simply. "You can have all the fancy equipment and perfect logistics in the world, but if you don't put your heart into the food, people taste it. They know, and from what Jack's told me, what I've heard from the others, you've got more heart than most people will ever have." The words settled into Beth's chest, easing some of the anxiety that had been coiling there since dawn. "Thank you," she said quietly. William patted her shoulder, then moved off to help with setup, leaving Beth with Jack. "He doesn't give compliments lightly," Jack said. "Consider yourself blessed." The next 3 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Beth worked alongside Jessica and Marcus in the massive commercial kitchen setup Maggie had coordinated. Portable grills, warming stations, prep tables, everything they needed to cook for a small army. The menu was ambitious but manageable. Slow-cooked pulled pork, grilled chicken with 3 different sauce options, sides of coleslaw, potato salad, and baked beans, cornbread fresh from the oven, and a dessert table that Marcus had somehow convinced 3 different chapter members to contribute to. By 11 o'clock, the park had transformed. The memorial wall had been erected, a portable structure covered in photographs of fallen brothers and sisters, decorated with flowers, bandanas, and personal mementos. Music played from speakers, classic rock mixing with the murmur of conversation as more people arrived. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children ran and played, while adults clustered in groups, sharing stories and laughter tinged with remembrance. At noon exactly, Jack Morrison stepped up to a microphone and the crowd fell silent. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying across the park, "we gather today to remember those who've ridden on ahead of us, those who flew their colors with pride, who stood by us in the darkest times, who reminded us what it means to be family." Beth paused in her work, listening as Jack spoke names, 23 of them. Members who'd passed in the year since the last memorial run. Some had died in accidents, some from illness, some from violence. Each name was met with responses from the crowd. Rest easy, brother. Ride free, sister. We remember. After the remembrance ceremony, it was time to eat. Beth stationed herself behind the serving line, flanked by Jessica on one side and Raymond on the other. Marcus coordinated the dessert table. Volunteers from the chapter helped manage the flow of people, keeping lines moving efficiently, and the people came. 200 turned into 250 as friends and extended family joined the gathering. Beth served plate after plate, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine despite her exhaustion. She watched faces light up as they tasted the food, heard murmurs of approval ripple through the crowd. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Beth's apron. "This is the best chicken I've ever had," she announced solemnly. Beth's heart melted. "Well, thank you, sweetheart. Want some extra?" The girl's eyes went wide, and Beth loaded an additional piece onto her plate, along with an extra serving of cornbread. As the child skipped away, clutching her plate like treasure, Beth caught Jack watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked during a brief lull. "You can't help yourself, can you?" Jack said, but he was smiling. "Always giving extra. Always making sure people have enough." Beth shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just food." "It's never just food," Jack said. "It's care. It's attention. It's telling people they matter. Don't diminish what you do, Beth." By 3 o'clock, everyone had been fed, many going back for seconds and thirds. The dessert table had been demolished. Children ran around with sugar-induced energy, while adults settled into lawn chairs, content and full. The afternoon had taken on a dreamlike quality. Golden sunlight filtering through the trees, laughter mixing with the distant rumble of motorcycles. Beth sat on the edge of a picnic table, her feet finally off the ground, a plate of food in her lap that Jessica had forced her to accept. She was so tired she could barely taste it, but she ate anyway, watching the scene unfold around her. Maggie Chen dropped down beside her. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," Beth corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Maybe," Maggie conceded. "But you were the heart of it. Everyone here can feel that." As the afternoon wore on, people began approaching Beth. Some thanked her for the food. Others shared stories about the fallen members they'd honored today, needing someone to listen. Beth found herself becoming a repository for grief and joy in equal measure, offering comfort the only way she knew how, with presence, attention, and understanding. William Garrett found her again as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Walk with me," he said, and it wasn't quite a request. They moved away from the main gathering toward the memorial wall where photographs smiled in the fading light. William stopped in front of one picture, a young man with a wild grin and eyes full of mischief. "My son," William said quietly, "died 15 years ago. Motorcycle accident on Highway 287. He was 26. Beth didn't say anything, just stood beside him in the kind of silence that holds space for grief. "These gatherings matter," William continued. "They're how we keep our dead alive, how we remember they were here, that they mattered. And the food," he turned to look at Beth, "the food is part of that. Breaking bread together, nourishing the living while we honor the dead. You understand that instinctively." "That's rare. I lost my husband," Beth said, 8 years ago. "I know what it's like to need people to remember, to need rituals that say they existed, they mattered, they're still part of us." William nodded slowly. "Then you understand why what you did today was more than just catering an event. You helped us remember, you helped us grieve, and you fed us while we did it. That's sacred work, whether you realize it or not." As darkness fell and the gathering began to wind down, Jack Morrison called everyone together one final time. He stood on a picnic table, backlit by string lights someone had hung in the trees, and held up a leather vest. Beth recognized it as the kind the angels wore, the colors they called them, the patches that identified chapter and rank and history. "Beth Callahan," Jack called out, and Beth's heart skipped. "Get up here," Jessica pushed her forward gently. The crowd parted as Beth made her way to the picnic table, her legs shaking with exhaustion and confusion. Jack helped her up beside him. "Beth isn't a member of our club," Jack announced to the assembled crowd. "She doesn't ride. She probably thinks motorcycles are loud and dangerous." This got a laugh. "But today she fed our community. She honored our traditions. She treated us like family. And in doing so, she became family." He held up the vest. "This doesn't make you a Hell's Angel," he said to Beth directly, "but it makes you ours. It means you're under our protection. It means when you call, we answer. It means you're part of something bigger than yourself." The vest was black leather, beautiful in its simplicity. On the back was a patch, "Friend of the Angels," with the chapter name underneath. On the front, over the heart, a small patch simply read, "Beth." Jack helped her into the vest. It fit perfectly. She suspected Maggie had provided her measurements. The leather was soft and warm, smelling of new beginnings. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Beth felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, laughing, overwhelmed by the acceptance and belonging washing over her. "Welcome to the family," Jack said, pulling her into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. Later, after the cleanup was done and the last of the guests had departed, Beth stood in the parking lot with Jessica and Marcus. Her new vest was draped over her shoulders against the evening chill. Her kids flanked her, both wearing expressions of pride and exhaustion. "Mom," Marcus said, "that was the coolest thing I've ever seen." "You're basically a biker now," Jessica added, grinning. "Does this mean we get motorcycles?" "Absolutely not," Beth said firmly, but she was smiling. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Next event is in 6 weeks. You win." Beth looked at her kids, at the empty park where 250 people had gathered to remember and celebrate, at the vest that marked her as part of something she'd never expected to join. She typed back, "I'm in." Because Beth Callahan had learned something important over the past 6 weeks. Kindness wasn't just about the small gestures. The extra serving of hash browns, the coffee refill, the mistake order that fed someone hungry. Kindness could be big and bold and ambitious. It could build bridges between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. It could transform a truck stop waitress into a caterer for angels. And sometimes, when you opened your heart wide enough to feed the hungry, whoever they were, wherever they came from, you found yourself fed in return. Not with food, but with something better: purpose, community, and the understanding that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who chooses you, and sometimes you choose them back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.